On a frigid January night in 1992, Detroit's abandoned Packard Automotive Plant became the unexpected tomb for Evelyn Morris, a 24-year-old waitress. Her body was found posed like a discarded mannequin among rusted machinery, a single bullet wound to the chest. For 27 years, her killer walked free among Motor City's residents until a rookie detective with personal stakes reopened the case and brought a shocking truth to light. The murderer wasn't a stranger lurking in shadows, but a trusted community leader hiding in plain sight. Violent crime was nothing new to Detroit in 1992, but even hardened officers were disturbed by the scene at the Packard Plant on January 17th. The sprawling ruins of America's industrial past had become a playground for urban explorers and criminals alike. When the call came in that winter morning about a body discovered in the plant's central building, it was initially logged as just another homicide in a city that recorded 595 that year alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Detroit in January 1992 was locked in winter's grip. Snow fell steadily from a slate-gray sky, covering the city's wounds with deceptive beauty. Temperatures had plunged below freezing for 10 consecutive days, transforming the Detroit River into a fractured mirror of ice. Against this bleak backdrop, the Motor City continued its painful struggle against economic decline, crime, and abandonment. The Packard Plant stood as a monument to this decline. Once a gleaming symbol of American industrial might, now a skeletal maze of crumbling concrete, graffiti, and twisted metal. The 5 million square foot complex sprawled across 40 acres, its broken windows like countless dead eyes staring out at a changed world. On that particular morning, 2 teenagers searching for scrap metal ventured deeper than usual into the plant's labyrinthine interior. In a secluded machine room on the 3rd floor, they discovered something that stopped them cold: a woman's body, carefully positioned in a sitting position against a pillar. Her eyes open but unseeing, frozen in death's eternal stare. The teens fled, eventually flagging down a patrol car on East Grand Boulevard. Officer Marcus Reynolds, a 15-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department, followed them back to the plant. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, finally landing on the grim tableau. The victim was young, African-American, wearing a waitress uniform from a local diner. A single bullet wound marked her chest, with minimal blood visible. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, as if she'd been arranged in a mockery of peaceful repose. Reynolds radioed in the discovery at 9:17 a.m. Within 30 minutes, the abandoned factory swarmed with police personnel. Crime scene tape fluttered in the icy wind, cutting through broken windows. Flashbulbs popped, illuminating decades of industrial decay and one fresh tragedy. Detective James Calloway, 53, headed the initial investigation. A battle-hardened investigator with salt and pepper hair and permanent shadows under his eyes. He'd worked homicide for 20 years and was 3 months from retirement. Standing over the body, collar turned up against the cold, he noted the victim's carefully arranged position, a hallmark of a killer sending a message. "No drag marks," he muttered to his partner, Detective Maria Ortiz. "She was killed elsewhere and brought here deliberately." The medical examiner confirmed this initial assessment. The victim had been dead for approximately 36 hours, and the lack of blood at the scene indicated she'd been moved post-mortem. The bullet that killed her was a .38 caliber, fired at close range directly into her heart. Professional, deliberate, personal. Identification came quickly. In her pocket was a waitress name tag, Evelyn. Her fingerprints matched those of Evelyn Morris, 24, who worked at the Blue Light Diner on Woodward Avenue. She'd been reported missing by her mother when she failed to return home after her shift on January 15th. Calloway and Ortiz drove to the modest bungalow in the North End neighborhood where Evelyn lived with her mother, Louise Morris, a hospital nurse, and her 7-year-old daughter, Sophia. The house was painfully neat, family photos covering the walls, Evelyn's high school graduation, Sophia's birthday parties, 3 generations of Morris women smiling from simple frames. Louise Morris sat rigid on the sofa as the detectives confirmed her worst fears. Her voice barely audible, she revealed that Evelyn had been saving to attend nursing school, working double shifts at the diner to build a better future for Sophia. "Did Evelyn have any enemies?" Calloway asked gently. "Anyone who might wish her harm." Louise shook her head, tears streaming silently down her lined face. Everyone loved Evelyn. She was light in this dark city. As they left, Ortiz noticed a small figure watching from the top of the stairs, Sophia clutching a teddy bear, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. The sight hit both detectives hard. Another child rendered motherless in a city that created orphans with brutal regularity. Back at the diner, employees spoke of Evelyn with genuine affection. She'd worked there for 3 years, never missed a shift, always punctual, always smiling despite the hardships of single motherhood. Her last shift had ended at 11 p.m. on January 15th. Security cameras showed her leaving through the back door, heading toward the bus stop as usual. The bus driver on that route remembered her, one of few passengers that snowy night. She'd exited at her regular stop, just 3 blocks from home. What happened in those 3 blocks became the central mystery of the case. A canvass of the neighborhood yielded little. One elderly resident reported hearing what might have been a car door slam around midnight, but nothing more. No gunshots, no screams, no signs of struggle. Evelyn had simply vanished between the bus stop and her front door, only to reappear dead at the Packard plant. For weeks, Calloway and Ortiz pursued every lead. They interviewed Evelyn's ex-boyfriend, the father of her daughter, but he had a solid alibi. He was serving time in Jackson prison. They tracked down regular customers at the diner, co-workers, old schoolmates. Everyone expressed shock, but no one provided useful information. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Physical evidence was similarly disappointing. The bullet had no matches in the database. No usable fingerprints were found on the body. Fibers collected from her clothing were common types that could have come from thousands of sources in Detroit. By March, the case was growing cold. Calloway, now officially retired, handed it over to a new detective who was juggling dozens of other homicides. The file, already growing thick with reports that led nowhere, was eventually moved to the department's bulging cold case storage. Louise Morris refused to let her daughter become just another statistic. Every year, on the anniversary of Evelyn's death, she organized a memorial walk from the Blue Light Diner to the edge of the Packard Plant property. Every year, she visited the precinct, asking about progress. Every year, the answer was the same: no new leads. Meanwhile, she raised Sophia with fierce determination, channeling her grief into ensuring her granddaughter would have the opportunities her daughter never lived to pursue. The little girl, who had watched detectives from the stairs, grew into a solemn teenager, with her mother's eyes and quiet resolve. The Morris case file gathered dust as Detroit itself transformed around it. The city declared bankruptcy in 2013. Urban renewal efforts began to take root. New businesses opened. The population decline slowed. Even the Packard Plant, that massive monument to industrial decay, was purchased by a developer with promises of renovation. In this changing city, Sophia Morris graduated high school in 2003 at the top of her class. Her grandmother sat in the front row, weeping with pride and sorrow. Evelyn should have been there to see her daughter receive her diploma. 4 years later, Sophia earned a criminal justice degree from Wayne State University. Her thesis was titled Cold Case Investigation Methodologies in Resource-Limited Urban Departments. To everyone's surprise, especially her grandmother's, Sophia joined the Detroit Police Department in 2008. "I need to understand," was all she said when Louise questioned her decision. While her classmates viewed her choice as idealistic or foolish, Joining a department infamous for its problems, Sophia had her own private motivation that she kept closely guarded. Rising through the ranks with quiet determination, Sophia eventually achieved her goal in 2017, transferred to the cold case unit. By then, the department had been reformed under federal oversight, new leadership, and improved funding. DNA technology had advanced dramatically. Digital databases had replaced many of the paper files that once filled precinct basements. On her first day in the unit, Sophia didn't immediately reach for her mother's file as her colleagues expected. Instead, she immersed herself in other cases, building her reputation as methodical and insightful. She studied advanced forensic techniques during her off hours and cultivated relationships with the revamped crime lab. "You've got to be patient," advised her supervisor, Lieutenant Carter Williams, an African-American man in his 50s with kind eyes and no illusions about the department's limitations. "Cold cases aren't solved with dramatic breakthroughs. They're solved with persistent, methodical work." Sophia nodded, absorbing the wisdom of experience. "I understand, sir. I'm here for the long haul." It wasn't until December 2018, nearly 2 years after joining the unit and approaching the 27th anniversary of her mother's murder, that Sophia finally signed out the Evelyn Morris case file. Williams noticed, but said nothing. Everyone in the department knew her story, and many had wondered how long she would wait. The file had grown thinner than she expected, pages lost during transfers, evidence misplaced during department moves. What remained was a faded collection of interview transcripts, crime scene photos, and dead-end leads. She spread them across her desk, these yellowing fragments of her mother's final chapter. The photos hit her hardest. Here was her mother as a victim, something she'd never seen before. In her memories and her grandmother's stories, Evelyn was vibrant, loving, determined. The crime scene photos showed something else entirely, a discarded object posed by the killer in a final act of control. Sophia worked methodically through the file, creating a detailed timeline and relationship map. She noted inconsistencies in statements, questions never fully explored, leads abandoned too quickly. The initial investigation had been thorough by 1992 standards, but limited by the technology and resources of the time. What caught her attention was a brief mention of a charity fundraiser held at the Blue Light Diner the week before Evelyn's murder. The event had raised money for a youth center in the neighborhood, organized by local businessman Victor Harmon. According to the interview notes, Harmon had been at the diner that night and remembered Evelyn as a lovely girl, very helpful. Sophia researched Victor Harmon. In 1992, he'd been a rising community leader, a Detroit native who'd made good, returned to his roots, and invested in neighborhood development. Over the subsequent decades, his star had risen dramatically. He'd served on the city council, headed several prominent charitable foundations, and was now, at 72, a respected elder statesman frequently consulted on urban renewal initiatives. Something about his brief mention in the file nagged at her. Why was a prominent businessman at a small diner fundraiser personally? Why had investigators not followed up more thoroughly? She dug deeper, pulling records of other cases from that era, community news archives and property records. A pattern slowly emerged. Harmon's youth initiatives had been concentrated in specific neighborhoods, including the one where Evelyn had lived. Several young women from these programs had received special mentorship, including financial support for education. On the surface, it appeared benevolent, a successful man giving back to his community. But Sophia's instincts, honed by years of police work, suggested something more complicated. She discreetly began interviewing women who had participated in Harmon's programs in the early 90s. Most spoke highly of him, but a few exhibited subtle discomfort. One, after significant reassurance about confidentiality, admitted that Harmon's mentorship had come with unwelcome advances, which she had rebuffed. "Nothing happened," the woman insisted. "He backed off when I said no, but things got colder after that. The scholarship money stopped coming. Sophia carefully built a profile of Victor Harmon that contrasted sharply with his public image. She tracked his movements around the time of Evelyn's murder, discovering he had cancelled several appointments during that period, citing illness. When she brought her findings to Lieutenant Williams, he listened with increasing concern. "This is thin, Morris," he cautioned. "Harmon is powerful, connected. If you're wrong, your career is over." "And if I'm right?" Sophia countered, eyes flashing with determination. "A killer has been walking free for 27 years, building a reputation as a community savior." Williams sighed, rubbing his temples. "What's your next move?" "DNA," Sophia replied. "The original investigators collected fibers from my mother's clothing. I want them retested with current technology." "If they still exist," Williams reminded her. "Evidence storage from that period was chaotic, I know. But I have to try." The search through evidence storage took days, boxes mislabeled, moved during department relocations, some damaged by a basement flood in 2001. Finally, a technician located a sealed evidence bag containing fibers from Evelyn's uniform. The chain of custody was intact, if barely. Modern testing revealed what 1992 technology couldn't: distinctive fibers from a high-end wool blend, consistent with luxury suits from the early 90s. Not conclusive, but another thread connecting to Harmon, who was known for his bespoke wardrobe even then. Sophia's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Reviewing digitized police reports from the period, she discovered a pattern of minor complaints near the Packard Plant in early 1992. Trespassing reports, suspicious vehicles, unusual activity. Most had been dismissed as routine in a city with far more serious crimes to address. One report detailed a security guard spotting a black Lincoln town car near the plant at 2 a.m. on January 16th, hours after Evelyn disappeared. The guard had noted the partial plate number out of habit, but never connected it to any case. When Sophia ran the partial plate through historical vehicle registration records, it matched a car registered to Victor Harmon's development company. "It's still circumstantial," Williams warned when she brought him the new evidence, "but enough for a quiet conversation with the DA." The district attorney listened to Sophia's presentation with growing interest. "We need more," she concluded, "but this warrants deeper investigation. Tread carefully, Detective, very carefully." With the DA's tacit approval, Sophia expanded her investigation. She obtained a warrant to access Harmon's phone records from 1992, stored on microfiche in the telephone company's archives. The records showed multiple calls to the Blue Light Diner when Evelyn would have been working. Former employees of Harmon's companies from that period were tracked down and interviewed. One remembered driving him to the Packard Plant area on several occasions for what Harmon called property assessments, though the company never developed anything nearby. Each piece was small, but together they formed a compelling mosaic. Victor Harmon had known Evelyn, had been near the crime scene, had exhibited patterns of inappropriate behavior toward young women he mentored, and had the means and opportunity to commit the murder. The final piece fell into place when Sophia located the original detective, James Calloway, now in his 80s and living in a retirement community in Florida. His memory remained sharp, especially regarding the cases that had haunted him into retirement. "I remember your mother's case," he told Sophia during a video call, his voice wavering with age and emotion. Something wasn't right about Harmon even then. But he had friends in the department, connections with city officials. "When I pushed too hard, I got warned off." "You suspected him?" Sophia asked, heart racing. Calloway nodded slowly. "I did. But suspicion isn't evidence, and evidence kept disappearing from the file. Little things, interview notes, background checks on Harmon. Nothing I could prove was deliberate tampering, but enough to make me wonder who was protecting him." His testimony about possible interference in the original investigation provided the leverage the DA needed. With careful preparation and absolute secrecy, they moved forward. On January 17, 2019, exactly 27 years after Evelyn's body was discovered, Victor Harmon was brought in for questioning. At 72, he remained imposing, tall, distinguished, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to respect and deference. Sophia watched from behind one-way glass as Williams conducted the initial interview. Harmon dismissed the inquiries with practiced ease, expressing appropriate concern about this tragic cold case while maintaining his complete ignorance. The tone changed when Williams mentioned the Lincoln town car spotted near the Packard plant. A barely perceptible shift in Harmon's posture, a tightening around his eyes. When presented with the phone records showing his calls to the diner, he offered reasonable explanations. He frequently checked on businesses involved in his community projects. It was only when Williams revealed they had a living witness, the name deliberately withheld, who could place him with Evelyn on the night of her disappearance, that Harmon's composure truly faltered. "This is absurd," he insisted, voice rising. "Who's making these allegations? I demand to speak with the commissioner." When Williams walked out, Sophia entered the interrogation room. The effect on Harmon was immediate. His face drained of color, lips parting in shock. 27 years had passed since he'd seen those eyes, but he recognized them instantly. They were Evelyn's eyes, staring back at him from her daughter's face. "Mr. Harmon," Sophia said calmly, setting a folder on the table as she sat across from him. "I'm Detective Sophia Morris." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. Harmon recovered slightly, straightening his custom-tailored suit. "You look like her," he finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "I know." Sophia kept her expression neutral, professional, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "That's not why I'm here." She opened the folder, spreading crime scene photos across the table. Harmon's eyes flicked down, then away. "Look at them," Sophia commanded softly. "Look at what happened to Evelyn Morris. Look at what happened to my mother." Harmon's lawyer, hastily summoned when the questioning began, intervened. "My client doesn't have to look at anything. Detective, this borders on harassment." "Your client has been lying for 27 years, Sophia responded, never taking her eyes off Harmon. "I have evidence placing his vehicle near the Packard plant the night my mother's body was dumped there. I have fiber evidence matching his custom suits on her clothing. I have phone records showing he called her repeatedly. And I have testimony from former Detective Calloway about evidence disappearing from the original investigation." She leaned forward. "What I don't have is why. Why did you kill her, Mr. Harmon?" The room fell silent. Even the lawyer seemed momentarily at a loss. Harmon stared at his manicured hands, now trembling slightly against the metal table. "I want immunity," he said finally, ignoring his lawyer's startled objection. "That's not happening," Sophia replied. "But the DA will consider your cooperation during sentencing." What followed was a confession that shattered the carefully constructed image of Victor Harmon, community savior. He had indeed mentored several young women through his programs, offering financial support with strings attached. Most had either accepted his advances or quietly walked away. Evelyn had been different. She'd threatened to expose him, to tell his wife, to go to the police. "She was going to ruin everything I'd built," Harmon said, his voice flat, emotionless. "I offered her money, more than enough to pay for nursing school. She refused." He described following her from the diner that snowy night, offering her a ride, which she reluctantly accepted due to the worsening weather. Their conversation in the car grew heated. When she attempted to exit the vehicle, he panicked and shot her with a .38 revolver he kept in his glove compartment. "It was impulse," he insisted, "not planned." But what followed betrayed that claim. He'd driven her body to the Packard plant, a property his company was secretly assessing for future development. He'd arranged her corpse precisely, a calculated display meant to suggest a ritualistic killing to throw investigators off his trail. "And it worked," he concluded, a hint of his old arrogance resurfacing. "For 27 years it worked." Sophia sat motionless, absorbing every word, every justification, every glimpse into the mind of the man who'd stolen her mother from her. When the confession concluded, she stood without a word and walked out, leaving uniformed officers to formally arrest Victor Harmon for the murder of Evelyn Morris. In the hallway, she braced herself against the wall, fighting for composure. Williams approached, concern evident on his weathered face. "You did it, Morris," he said quietly. "You brought him down." She nodded, unable to speak. The victory felt hollow, anticlimactic. 27 years of absence, of questions, of what-ifs, reduced to a sterile confession in an interrogation room. The arrest of Victor Harmon sent shockwaves through Detroit. News helicopters circled police headquarters as he was led out in handcuffs, his distinguished profile captured in countless photographs that would fill front pages across the nation. The story was irresistible. Respected community leader revealed as killer, case solved by victim's daughter turned detective. As media attention intensified, more women came forward with stories of Harmon's inappropriate behavior. The true count of his victims would never be known, but investigators believed Evelyn had been his only murder, a desperate act by a man accustomed to getting his way. The prosecution built a meticulous case, combining Sophia's modern investigative work with testimony from the original detectives. Physical evidence was limited after 27 years, but what remained was damning when analyzed with contemporary techniques. Harmon's defense team attempted to suppress his confession, claiming psychological coercion, but the judge denied their motion. Throughout the preparations for trial, Sophia maintained her professional demeanor. She worked 14-hour days, ensuring every detail was documented, every witness prepared. At night, alone in her apartment, she would sometimes talk to the photograph of her mother on her dresser, updating her on the day's progress. "We're getting there, Mom," she whispered one evening, exhaustion etched on her face. He won't escape justice this time. The trial began in September 2019. The courtroom was packed every day, journalists squeezed into back rows, sketch artists capturing the dramatic tableau. Harmon at the defense table, once imposing but now diminished. Sophia sitting with the prosecution, her posture rigid with determination. Louise Morris attended every day, her 76-year-old frame supported by a walker, her eyes never leaving Harmon. She had waited nearly 3 decades for this moment, had raised her granddaughter alone, had kept vigil for her murdered daughter. Her quiet dignity became a powerful presence in the courtroom. The prosecution presented a methodical case, building a timeline that left no room for reasonable doubt. Witness after witness took the stand, piecing together the events of January 15, 1992. Former Blue Light Diner employees testified about Harmon's visits. The bus driver confirmed dropping Evelyn at her usual stop. Forensic experts explained how modern technology revealed evidence overlooked in the original investigation. Most devastating was the testimony from women who had experienced Harmon's mentorship in the early 90s. Their stories followed a pattern: initial support and encouragement, followed by increasing demands, subtle threats, unwanted advances. Evelyn, they explained, had been different, more outspoken, less willing to be intimidated. "She talked about reporting him," one woman testified, her voice breaking. "I told her to stay quiet, that no one would believe her over him. I've carried that guilt for 27 years. When James Calloway testified via video link from Florida, the courtroom fell silent. The former detective, now frail but clear-minded, described his growing suspicions about Harmon in 1992, the subtle pressure from superior officers to focus elsewhere, the missing notes and reports that had frustrated his investigation. "In those days," he explained, "someone with Harmon's connections was practically untouchable. We didn't have DNA, digital records, the tools available today. But I never forgot Evelyn Morris. Some cases stay with you." The defense attempted to portray Harmon as a community hero whose reputation was being destroyed by circumstantial evidence and unreliable memories. They emphasized the passage of time, questioned the integrity of evidence storage, and suggested that Sophia's personal vendetta had corrupted the investigation. Their arguments fell flat against the weight of accumulated evidence. When they called character witnesses, community leaders, politicians, non-profit directors, The prosecution's cross-examination revealed how many had benefited financially from association with Harmon's various enterprises. On the trial's 10th day, the prosecution called Sophia to testify. She took the stand in her dress uniform, back straight, voice steady as she walked the jury through her investigation. Her testimony was professional, methodical, betraying no emotion until the prosecutor asked a final question. "Detective Morris, why did you become a police officer?" Sophia paused, looking directly at Harmon for the first time. "I became an officer because I wanted to understand why the system failed my mother. I wanted to learn how to fix that system from within. And I wanted to make sure that no other child would have to grow up wondering if their parent's killer was walking free, being celebrated, building monuments to himself while they visited an empty grave." The courtroom remained utterly silent as she stepped down from the witness stand. In that moment, she wasn't just a detective presenting evidence. She was the living embodiment of justice delayed, but not denied. On October 21st, 2019, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. As the foreman rose, Louise reached for Sophia's hand, gripping it with surprising strength. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Victor Harmon, guilty. The words hung in the air for a breathless moment before the courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits, eager to break the news. The judge called for order, his gavel barely audible above the commotion. Through it all, Sophia sat motionless, feeling her grandmother's tears falling on their clasped hands. She watched Harmon's shoulders slump as the reality of the verdict settled over him. His carefully constructed world had finally crumbled, revealed as nothing but a facade concealing a murderer. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Sophia delivered her victim impact statement. Standing at the podium, she addressed not just the court, but the man who had stolen her mother from her. "Victor Harmon, you took more than a life on January 15th, 1992. You took a daughter from her mother, a mother from her child. You stole my memories, my chance to know her, her chance to see me grow up. You took her dreams of becoming a nurse, of building a better life." She paused, her composure unwavering. "But there are things you couldn't take. You couldn't take her spirit, which lives on in me. You couldn't take the truth, which has finally come to light. And you can't take our peace, which begins today." The judge sentenced Harmon to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, Harmon, once towering, now stooped, glanced back at Sophia. Their eyes met briefly before he disappeared through the door to begin paying his long-overdue debt to justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Sophia stepped to the impromptu press conference, Louise at her side, supported by Williams and other officers from the cold case unit. "Today, justice has been served for Evelyn Morris," Sophia stated, her voice carrying across the crowd. "But this case represents more than one murder solved. It stands for all victims who wait for answers, for all families who keep faith through decades of uncertainty." She gestured to the officers beside her. The Detroit Police Department's cold case unit remains committed to pursuing justice, no matter how much time has passed. No victim is forgotten. No case is truly closed until the truth is known. As questions flew from reporters, Williams stepped forward, allowing Sophia and Louise to slip away from the media frenzy. They walked slowly down the courthouse steps, 3 generations of Morris women, one present only in spirit, but palpably there nonetheless. "What now?" Louise asked quietly as they reached the street. Sophia looked up at the Detroit sky, clearer than it had been in years, just as the city itself was clearing away decades of neglect and decay. "Now we live, Grandma," she replied. "That's what Mom would want." In the weeks following the verdict, Sophia received multiple commendations from the department, offers for promotion, even queries from publishers interested in her story. She declined most, accepting only a modest ceremony where she was officially recognized for solving one of the department's longest-standing cold cases. The true reward came in quieter moments, helping her grandmother finally plan a proper funeral, now that Evelyn's body could be released from evidence storage. establishing a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees, named in Evelyn's honor. And most importantly, finding her own path forward, unburdened by the question that had shaped her entire life. The Packard Plant, where Evelyn's body had been found, faced demolition as part of Detroit's ongoing revitalization. Before the wrecking balls arrived, Sophia visited one last time, standing in the cavernous space where teenagers had discovered her mother 27 years earlier. The building was just a shell now, graffiti-covered walls open to the elements, nature slowly reclaiming what industry had abandoned. Sophia placed a single white rose on the concrete floor, then turned away, leaving the ghosts of the past behind. Detroit's newspapers marked the anniversary of the verdict with reflective pieces about the case. The Detroit Free Press ran a feature titled "Motor City Justice: How Detroit's Renewal Extended to Its Cold Cases." Accompanying the article was a photograph of Sophia at her desk in the cold case unit, surrounded by files, other victims waiting for their stories to be told, their killers to be named. The press attention brought new life to the unit. Tips began flowing in for other long-dormant cases, some helpful, many not, but all indicating a renewed public faith in the possibility of justice. Department funding for cold cases increased modestly. New technologies were acquired. Additional detectives were assigned. Williams, approaching retirement himself, watched these developments with satisfaction. He had witnessed the department at its lowest points, understaffed, under-resourced, under-trained, and had feared he would end his career without seeing meaningful change. Now, looking at officers like Sophia, he felt cautious optimism for the future. "You've started something here," he told her one morning as they reviewed case assignments. "People believe again." Sophia nodded, understanding the weight of his words. In a city that had experienced so much disappointment, so much institutional failure, belief was a precious resource. She felt the responsibility to nurture that fragile trust, to demonstrate that the system could work, even if it sometimes took decades. As winter settled over Detroit once more, bringing the same bitter cold that had gripped the city when Evelyn was murdered, Sophia found herself driving through her childhood neighborhood. The modest house where she'd grown up with her grandmother stood in a row of similar homes, some renovated, others still showing the scars of economic hardship. She parked outside, studying the porch where she had played as a child, the windows through which she had watched the world, always wondering about the mother she barely remembered. Louise had moved to a senior living community after the trial, unable to manage the stairs anymore, but the house remained in the family, awaiting decisions about its future. A young woman emerged from the house next door, a toddler balanced on her hip. She noticed Sophia and raised a hand in greeting, curiosity evident on her face at the unmarked police car. "Can I help you?" she called. Sophia stepped out, introducing herself. "I grew up in this house," she explained, "just visiting old memories." Recognition dawned on the woman's face. "You're the detective, the one who solved her own mother's murder. My mom used to talk about your family all the time." They chatted briefly, the woman explaining that the neighborhood was changing, new families moving in, abandoned properties being renovated, community gardens replacing vacant lots. There was a sense of renewal, of possibility that hadn't existed for decades. As Sophia prepared to leave, the woman hesitated, then spoke again. "What you did, solving that case after all those years, it meant something to people around here. My mom always said Evelyn Morris deserved better than being forgotten." Sophia smiled, touched by the realization that her mother's memory had lived on not just in their family, but in the community. "No one deserves to be forgotten," she replied. Back at police headquarters, life continued its steady rhythm. New cases arrived, old ones were revisited, the constant cycle of investigation and evidence and interviews. Sophia maintained her methodical approach, but colleagues noticed subtle changes, a new openness, occasional smiles, signs that she was no longer defined solely by her quest for answers. She began mentoring younger officers, particularly those drawn to investigative work. Her story had inspired a new generation within the department, officers who saw in her example the true meaning of the badge they carried. She shared techniques, insights, but most importantly, her unwavering belief in the value of patience and persistence. Cold cases aren't about dramatic breakthroughs, she would tell them, echoing William's words from years earlier. They're solved through methodical work, attention to detail, and refusing to let go. On January 15th, 2020, the 28th anniversary of Evelyn's murder, Sophia and Louise visited the cemetery together. The headstone, finally installed after the trial concluded, bore Evelyn's name, dates, and a simple inscription. Beloved mother, daughter, nurse-to-be, justice has been served. Louise placed fresh flowers against the cold stone, her weathered hand brushing snow from the engraved letters. She would be so proud of you, she told Sophia, voice barely audible above the winter wind. So proud of the woman you've become. Sophia nodded, throat tight with emotion. For so many years, this date had been marked by absence, by questions, by the gnawing emptiness of unresolved grief. Now, standing before her mother's properly marked grave, knowing her killer was behind bars, she felt a new sensation. Not closure exactly, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from fulfilling a promise, from completing a journey begun in childhood. As they turned to leave, Louise paused, looking back at the stone. You know, for years I was so angry. At God, at the police, at the world, for taking her from us. But now I find myself grateful. Grateful? Sophia asked, surprised. Grateful that the truth was finally told, Louise explained. Grateful that her story didn't end in that abandoned factory. Grateful that through you, she changed things, made them better for other victims. Sophia helped her grandmother back to the car, reflecting on those words. Her mother's story hadn't ended in the Packard plant. In many ways, it had only begun there, setting in motion a chain of events that would span decades, shape a life, and ultimately bring about changes no one could have predicted in 1992. Back at the precinct, a new file waited on Sophia's desk, another cold case. Another family waiting for answers, another truth buried beneath years of silence. She opened it, ready to begin again, carrying forward the lessons of her own journey. Detroit continued its slow transformation around her. New buildings rose where abandoned ones had stood. The automotive industry found new footing in electric vehicle technology. Population decline stabilized as young professionals discovered the city's affordability and gritty charm. The narrative of Detroit was changing, not erasing its troubled past, but building upon it, finding strength in its history while refusing to be defined solely by its challenges. In this evolving landscape, the resolution of the Evelyn Morris case became a powerful symbol, a reminder that renewal meant not just physical reconstruction, but moral reckoning, that justice delayed need not be justice denied, that even the most powerful figures could be held accountable for their actions. Victor Harmon, once celebrated as a cornerstone of Detroit's revival, was now incarcerated at Chippewa Correctional Facility in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. His name was removed from community centers and charitable foundations. His legacy of apparent philanthropy was re-examined in light of his true character. For Sophia, his fall from grace was not a cause for celebration, but a sobering reminder of how power and reputation could shield predators. She thought often of the women who had testified, who had carried their silence for decades out of fear or shame. Their courage in finally speaking out had been crucial to securing the conviction. When the Detroit Free Press ran a one-year retrospective on the case, they interviewed several of these women. One quote in particular stood out. Watching Detective Morris face down Harmon in that courtroom gave me back something I thought was gone forever, my voice. If she could wait 27 years for justice, I could finally tell my truth. The article was accompanied by statistics showing a marked increase in reporting of historical sexual harassment and assault cases in Detroit since the trial. Victims who had remained silent, some for decades, were coming forward, inspired by the Morris case to seek their own measure of justice. Williams, who had postponed his retirement to see the case through to its conclusion, finally stepped down in spring 2020. At his farewell gathering, he pulled Sophia aside. "I've been in this department for 35 years, he told her, voice rough with emotion. "Seen the worst of times and, I hope, the beginning of better ones. What you did, not just solving your mother's case, but how you did it by the book, no shortcuts, no compromise, that's the foundation this department needs to rebuild on." He pressed something into her hand, a small, worn detective's shield, his first badge from when he'd made detective decades earlier. "Keep reminding them what this stands for," he said simply. Sophia was promoted to lead the expanded cold case unit shortly after Williams' retirement. Under her guidance, the unit adopted new methodologies, embraced advancing technologies, and most importantly, maintained a victim-centered approach that never lost sight of the human lives behind the case numbers. Her office wall held a simple frame containing a waitress name tag reading Evelyn and a photograph of her mother in her blue light diner uniform, smiling broadly at the camera. It served as a daily reminder of why the work mattered, why every cold case deserved the same methodical attention, the same refusal to surrender to time or circumstance. As Detroit's renewal continued, as old wounds slowly healed and new possibilities emerged, Sophia Morris became something more than just a detective who had solved a high-profile murder. She became a symbol of the city itself, resilient, determined, unwilling to forget its painful past, but refusing to be defined by it, committed to building something better from the ruins of what had been lost. In police academies across Michigan, her investigation became a case study in cold case methodology. In Detroit neighborhoods, her story was told as evidence that the system could work, that truth could prevail, that justice, however delayed, could eventually arrive. For Sophia herself, the greatest victory was not professional recognition or departmental accolades, but the simple freedom to live unburdened by the question that had defined her existence for so long. With her mother's killer finally behind bars, she could begin to discover who she was beyond the quest for answers, beyond the mission that had shaped her path. On her desk, alongside active case files, sat a stack of nursing school applications. She had established the Evelyn Morris Memorial Scholarship, but had recently decided to honor her mother's dream in a more personal way, by pursuing it herself, part-time, alongside her detective work. "It's never too late to pick up a dream," she explained, when colleagues expressed surprise at her new venture. That's another lesson from cold cases. Time passes, but purpose remains. As Detroit entered 2021, the city's slow renaissance continued despite setbacks and challenges. New businesses opened on streets long abandoned. Community initiatives took root in neighborhoods once written off. The narrative of a city in terminal decline was giving way to a more complex story of resilience and renewal. In her role, leading the cold case unit, Sophia became part of this narrative, a symbol of Detroit's refusal to leave its unresolved past behind, its determination to face hard truths as a foundation for genuine progress. The unit's increased success rate under her leadership stood as evidence that institutions could reform, that systems could improve, that change was possible even in areas long considered hopeless. Each solved case represented not just professional achievement, but moral victory. Another family granted answers, another victim remembered, another perpetrator held accountable, regardless of time past or status held. For the detective who had waited 27 years for justice, this was the true measure of success, not commendations or headlines, but the quiet knowledge that the work continued, that other daughters and sons might find the answers they sought, that in a city redefining itself, justice remained a cornerstone of genuine renewal. When reporters asked what drove her continuing commitment to cold cases despite the emotional toll, Sophia would often answer with her mother's favorite saying, one that Louise had shared with her throughout childhood: The night may be long, but morning always comes. In Detroit, a city that had endured decades of darkness, there were signs of dawn on the horizon. And in the gradually brightening landscape, Detective Sophia Morris continued her work, case by case, truth by truth, bringing light to shadows long thought permanent. The Motor City was finally shifting into gear, driving toward a future built on the difficult but necessary work of confronting its past, a journey that had begun on a snowy night in 1992, with a young woman who refused to be silenced, and concluded 27 years later with her daughter's unwavering pursuit of the truth. Across Detroit, the seasons continued their relentless cycle. Spring blossoms gave way to summer heat, which surrendered to autumn's golden light. As 2021 progressed, the city that had witnessed both American industrial might and devastating economic collapse continued its uneven but determined revitalization. For Sophia Morris, life had found a new rhythm. Weekdays were dedicated to the cold case unit, where she led a team now expanded to 6 detectives. Evenings and weekends were split between nursing classes at Wayne State University and quiet moments with her grandmother, whose health had begun a gradual decline. The Morris case had faded from headlines, but its impact continued to ripple through Detroit's justice system. Other cold cases were reopened, examined with fresh eyes and new technologies. Families who had given up hope contacted the department, asking if their loved ones' unsolved murders might finally receive attention. On a crisp October morning, Sophia arrived at headquarters to find Lieutenant Marcus Reynolds waiting by her office door. Reynolds had replaced Williams upon his retirement, bringing his own 30 years of experience to the unit. "We've got something," he said without preamble, his usual gruff manner betraying a hint of excitement. 17 unsolved murders across Michigan between 1987 and 1994. All young women, all positioned in a similar manner after death. The task force believes they're connected. Sophia followed him to the conference room, where crime scene photographs covered the walls. Young women arranged in seated positions, hands folded in their laps, in various abandoned buildings across the state. The similarity to her mother's murder was unmistakable. "They're calling him the arrangement killer," Reynolds explained. "State police have been building the case quietly for months, connecting dots between jurisdictions. They want you on the task force." Sophia studied the photographs, her trained eye noting the precise positioning of each victim, the careful attention to detail, hallmarks of a methodical killer with a specific vision. She thought of her mother, posed against a pillar in the Packard plant, and felt a chill race down her spine. "Victor Harmon couldn't have done all these," she said quietly. "He was traveling extensively during some of these dates. He was in Europe when at least 3 victims were killed." Reynolds nodded. "That's why they're interested in your perspective. If Harmon didn't kill these other women, but the signatures are nearly identical, then he either learned from or taught someone else," Sophia finished, the implication settling heavily in the room. The multi-jurisdictional task force had established temporary headquarters in Lansing, the state capital. Detectives from various Michigan cities filled the repurposed office space, case files stacked on folding tables, a massive timeline covering one wall. Sophia was introduced as the detective who had solved the Evelyn Morris case, earning respectful nods from officers who recognized the significance of that investigation. State Police Detective Roy Garrison, the task force leader, was a square-jawed man with salt-and-pepper hair and a reputation for methodical thoroughness. He had personally connected 5 of the 17 murders after noticing the pattern while digitizing cold case files. "Each victim was posed similarly," he explained during Sophia's orientation briefing. "Seated position, hands folded, eyes left open. Each was placed in a location with historical significance. Abandoned factories, closed schools, former hospitals. All were killed elsewhere and moved post-mortem." Sophia reviewed case files, noting similarities and differences. The victims ranged in age from 19 to 32, came from various socio-economic backgrounds and had no apparent connections to one another. Some had been missing for days before their bodies were discovered. Others were found within hours of disappearance. What linked these women? She asked during a team meeting. There has to be a common factor beyond the killer's methodology. We've been working that angle for months, said a Detroit detective named Wilson. Different workplaces, different social circles, different neighborhoods. No overlap we can find. Sophia returned to the timeline, studying photographs of the victims in life, smiling school portraits, candid snapshots, workplace ID photos. Something nagged at her, a pattern just beyond her grasp. She called Louise that evening. "Grandma, do you remember if Mom ever mentioned volunteering anywhere? Community service of any kind?" Louise was silent for a moment, then answered slowly. She tutored adult literacy at the library sometimes. And there was a program through the diner. They collected toys for children at Christmas. Sophia made a note, then asked the same question of families of other victims. Patterns began to emerge. Not obvious connections, but subtle overlaps. Several had volunteered for literacy programs. Others had participated in food drives or toy collections. All had been involved in some capacity with community service. At the next task force meeting, Sophia presented her findings. "I think our killer found his victims through charitable work. Each woman volunteered in some capacity, usually literacy programs or holiday drives." Garrison looked skeptical. "That's a tenuous connection at best." "It's also the only connection we've found," Sophia countered. "And it fits Harmon's methodology. He used charitable foundations as hunting grounds. What if our killer, whether working with Harmon or independent of him, used the same approach?" The team began investigating volunteers and coordinators involved with charitable programs across Michigan during the relevant time period. The list of potential suspects grew unwieldy, hundreds of names, most untraceable after nearly 3 decades. Weeks passed with little progress. Christmas approached, bringing with it the annual increase in charitable activities, food drives, toy collections, coat donations. Sophia found herself pausing at a donation box in the precinct lobby, remembering her mother collecting toys at the diner. Something clicked. She returned to the case files, checking dates of disappearances. 14 of the 17 victims had vanished between November and January, during peak charitable season. "It's not just that they volunteered," she told Reynolds during a late-night strategy session. "It's when they disappeared. Our killer is active during the holiday season, when charitable giving is at its highest." This new timeline focus narrowed their suspect pool. They identified 28 individuals who had been involved with multiple charitable organizations across Michigan during the years in question, were present in the relevant cities during murder dates, and remained unaccounted for during critical time periods. Among them was a name that caught Sophia's attention: Gregory Palmer, a freelance photographer who had documented charitable events for various organizations' promotional materials. His travel records aligned with murder locations. His access gave him opportunities to observe and interact with volunteers. And most intriguingly, he had photographed events at Harmon's foundations on multiple occasions. Background checks revealed that Palmer, now 63, had studied medical illustration in college before switching to photography. This training would have given him knowledge of anatomy and physiology, potentially explaining the precise positioning of victims. His work brought him into contact with prominent community members, including Victor Harmon, with whom he appeared in several newspaper photographs from charity galas in the early 1990s. "We need to find him," Sophia told the task force. "His background, his connections to Harmon, his presence at murder locations, it's too many coincidences." Current records showed Palmer living in Traverse City, a picturesque northern Michigan town on Grand Traverse Bay. He ran a small photography studio specializing in wedding and family portraits, his website showcasing happy couples against scenic backdrops. The task force obtained surveillance authorization, establishing discreet observation of Palmer's movements. Sophia and Garrison traveled to Traverse City, setting up in a hotel room converted to a temporary command center. Winter had transformed the tourist town, snow blanketing the streets, holiday decorations glimmering along the waterfront. For 3 days, they watched Palmer go about his seemingly ordinary life, meeting clients at his studio, grocery shopping, attending a local arts council meeting. Nothing in his behavior suggested a man with 17 murders in his past. "We need to get closer," Sophia argued after the 3rd day of unproductive surveillance. "We need to see how he reacts to specific triggers." Garrison reluctantly agreed to a controlled approach. They created a cover story. Sophia would pose as a potential client seeking photography for a fictional charity event. The interaction would allow them to observe Palmer's reaction to charitable work and to subtle references about Detroit in the early 1990s. The plan was set for December, and Sophia prepared meticulously, studying Palmer's website to understand his style preferences, creating a detailed backstory for her fictitious charity. She wore a concealed recording device and carried a panic button that would summon backup if necessary. Palmer's studio occupied a converted Victorian house on a quiet side street. The reception area featured framed photographs of smiling families, beaming brides, high school seniors posed against Lake Michigan. Nothing suggested darkness or violence, just the carefully composed images of a skilled commercial photographer. Palmer himself was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and thinning grey hair. His movements were precise, his manner professional as he greeted Sophia and invited her to discuss her project in his consultation room. "So you're organizing a fundraiser for adult literacy," he said, reviewing the brochure Sophia had created. "Wonderful cause. I actually did quite a bit of work with literacy programs years ago, in Detroit primarily." Sophia noted how he volunteered this information unprompted. "Detroit was where I started my career as well," she replied, watching his reaction. "Early 90s, difficult time for the city." Palmer's expression remained pleasant, but she noted a slight tension in his shoulders. "Indeed it was. I photographed some of the early revitalization efforts, quite rewarding to document communities rebuilding." The conversation continued, Sophia carefully dropping references to locations near murder sites, charitable organizations linked to victims, even mentioning Harmon's foundations. Palmer remained composed, professional, though she detected subtle shifts in his demeanor when certain topics arose. A tightening around the eyes, a momentary pause before responding. As the consultation concluded, Palmer offered his portfolio for review. "I have more examples in the storage room, if you'd like to see work specifically from charitable events." Something in his tone sent warning signals through Sophia's mind. The storage room would be isolated, away from the reception area where the receptionist might overhear. She declined politely, citing another appointment, and left with promises to be in touch. Outside, she met Garrison in a surveillance vehicle parked down the street. "He's our guy," she said with quiet certainty. The way he reacted to specific locations, his knowledge of the literacy programs, his connection to Harmon, it all fits. "Reaction isn't evidence," Garrison cautioned. "We need more before we can move on him." Sophia agreed, but her instincts screamed that they were close. They expanded surveillance, obtaining warrants for Palmer's phone and internet records. His search history revealed research on cold case investigation techniques and Detroit news articles about the Harmon trial, innocuous on their own but suspicious in context. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. The task force had been reviewing evidence from the original crime scenes, re-examining items with technology unavailable in the early 1990s. A partial fingerprint from a Flint victim's necklace, previously unidentifiable, now produced a match through the expanded AFIS database. Gregory Palmer, arrested for trespassing in 1985, before the murders began. Armed with this physical connection, they obtained search warrants for Palmer's home and studio. The task force moved at dawn on December 23rd, surrounding both locations before Palmer arrived for his morning appointments. Sophia and Garrison led the team at the studio, while state police officers secured the residence. They entered silently, clearing rooms methodically until they reached a locked door in the basement. The studio building's renovated Victorian architecture included a warren of small storage rooms below ground, originally coal cellars and root storage. The locksmith accompanying them worked quickly, the door swinging open to reveal a space utterly unlike the tasteful studio above. This room contained a photographer's darkroom setup, but the images hanging from drying lines weren't family portraits or wedding photos. They were carefully composed, black and white studies of abandoned buildings, factories, schools, hospitals, the exact locations where victims' bodies had been discovered. Most disturbing was a shrine-like arrangement on one wall, 17 framed photographs, each showing a victim in their final posed position, taken before their bodies were discovered by authorities. These were not crime scene photographs, but the killer's own documentation of his work. "He photographed them," Sophia whispered, horror and confirmation mingling as she studied the images. That was his signature. Among the photographs hung a familiar image, Evelyn Morris propped against a pillar in the Packard plant, exactly as she'd been found, but photographed from angles not included in police documentation. This was an image taken by the killer himself. "But Harmon confessed to my mother's murder," Sophia said, confusion momentarily displacing her professional detachment. Garrison studied the photographs. Maybe they worked together. Or maybe one took credit for the other's work. The team at Palmer's house reported an equally disturbing discovery, journals dating back to 1987, detailing his art installations using human subjects. The writings revealed a mind obsessed with creating what he called eternal portraits of women who embodied charitable spirits. He described in clinical detail how he selected, followed, and ultimately preserved his subjects in historically significant locations. Most revealing were entries about Victor Harmon, describing their initial meeting at a gallery opening in 1988, their discussions about art and preservation, and ultimately their collaboration on the Evelyn Morris installation in 1992. "Harmon has the connections I lack," one entry read. "His foundations give access to subjects I would otherwise miss. His appreciation for my work is gratifying, though his motivations differ from my artistic vision." When Palmer arrived at his studio that morning, officers were waiting. He offered no resistance, his expression betraying only mild annoyance at the interruption to his schedule. Even as evidence was catalogued and removed from his darkroom, he maintained the demeanor of a respectable business owner, inconvenienced by a misunderstanding. Only when confronted with the journal entries did his facade crack slightly. "You've misinterpreted my artistic process," he said coolly. "These are conceptual pieces, fiction writing to accompany my photographic studies of urban decay." His composure finally shattered when Sophia identified herself as Evelyn Morris's daughter. Palmer stared at her, recognition dawning as he saw Evelyn's eyes in her face. For the first time, emotion broke through his controlled exterior, not remorse or fear, but a disturbing fascination. "The resemblance is remarkable," he said softly. "You have her eyes, her presence." Harmon never understood the artistic significance of that particular piece. He saw only a threat to his reputation, but I saw transcendence. Sophia maintained her professional demeanor, though her hands trembled slightly as she read Palmer his rights. As he was led away, he turned back to her. "You should thank me," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I preserved her forever, made her immortal. Without me, she would have just faded away like everyone else." The evidence recovered from Palmer's home and studio was overwhelming. Beyond the photographs and journals, forensic teams discovered souvenirs from each victim, jewelry, identification cards, personal items carefully preserved in labeled boxes. DNA testing would later confirm the presence of victims' blood on tools stored in a locked cabinet. Most disturbing was a partially completed journal entry dated the previous week, outlining plans for an anniversary installation to mark 30 years since his first artwork. The target was another literacy program volunteer, a young woman whose movements he had already begun documenting with surveillance photographs. The task force had intervened just in time to prevent an 18th murder. The intended victim was placed under protection while investigators built their case, unaware how close she had come to becoming part of Palmer's twisted gallery. At Detroit Police Headquarters, Sophia faced the most difficult professional challenge of her career, interviewing the man who had actually murdered her mother, while the man convicted of the crime sat in prison. The legal and ethical implications were staggering. Before questioning Palmer, she met with the District Attorney Reynolds and Garrison to establish a strategy. The evidence against Palmer for 16 murders was overwhelming, but his exact role in Evelyn Morris's death remained unclear. "Harmon confessed," Reynolds reminded them. His fingerprints were on the car. The evidence supported his conviction. But Palmer's photographs show he was there, Sophia countered. And his journals suggest collaboration. We need to understand exactly what happened. The district attorney nodded grimly. If two people were involved, both bear responsibility under the law. But we need clarity before making any decisions about the Harmon conviction. The interview room was stark, intentionally uncomfortable. Palmer sat calmly, hands folded on the metal table, looking more like an accountant than a serial killer. His attorney, hastily retained from a prominent Detroit firm, sat beside him, tense and clearly disturbed by the evidence presented. Sophia entered with Garrison, deliberately controlling her breathing, maintaining professional detachment despite the hurricane of emotions beneath her calm exterior. She placed photographs on the table, not Palmer's artistic shots, but crime scene images of his victims. "Gregory Palmer," she began formally, "you've been advised of your rights and have counsel present. We're here to discuss your involvement in 17 murders across Michigan between 1987 and 1994. Palmer glanced at the photographs without reaction. "I've created photographic studies of urban decay and human transience. That's not a crime. The journals in your home detail how you selected, abducted, murdered, and posed these women." Garrison interjected. "That goes well beyond photography." Palmer's attorney attempted to intervene, but Palmer himself raised a hand to silence him. "My journals are artistic expressions, narrative companions to visual work. They're not confessions." Sophia maintained eye contact, refusing to be deflected. "Let's focus on January 15th, 1992, Evelyn Morris. Your journal specifically mentions collaboration with Victor Harmon on this project." Something shifted in Palmer's demeanor, a spark of interest, perhaps even excitement. "The Packard Plant installation, one of my most significant works. The composition was perfect, the contrast of life and death, youth against industrial decay, truly transcendent." "Tell me what happened," Sophia pressed, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "Exactly what happened." Palmer tilted his head, studying her with unnerving intensity. "Harmon approached me. He had a problem, a young woman threatening his reputation, his foundations, his access to subjects. I had an artistic vision for the Packard plant that required the right subject. Our interests aligned." He described, with disturbing detachment, how Harmon had identified Evelyn as both his problem and Palmer's opportunity. Harmon followed her from work that night, offered a ride in the snowy weather. But instead of killing her himself, as he'd claimed in his confession, he had driven her to a predetermined location where Palmer waited. "I administered the euthanasia solution," Palmer explained, as if discussing a technical procedure. "Quick, painless, dignified." Harmon was too emotional, too angry. He would have made it messy, ruined the aesthetic. This way, she remained perfect for the composition. Together, they had transported Evelyn's body to the Packard plant. Palmer had arranged her precisely, photographed his installation, then left Harmon to dispose of her personal effects, including her car, which Harmon pushed into the Columbia River. "He was practical but lacked vision," Palmer continued. "He saw only a problem eliminated. I saw art created. We used each other for our separate purposes." Sophia maintained her composure through sheer force of will, recording every word, building the case that would put Palmer away forever, while also complicating the already concluded case against Harmon. Both men had participated in Evelyn's murder, one from fear and anger, the other from twisted artistic ambition. When the interview concluded, Sophia stepped into the hallway, legs suddenly unsteady. Garrison placed a supportive hand on her shoulder, his usual stoicism softened by concern. "You did good in there," he said quietly. "Better than anyone had a right to expect." She nodded, unable to speak immediately. The truth she had sought for so long had finally emerged, but it was more complex and disturbing than she had imagined. Two men had conspired to kill her mother, not in passion or impulse, but in cold, calculated cooperation, each for their own purpose. The legal aftermath was complicated and prolonged. Palmer was charged with 16 counts of first-degree murder for the victims connected exclusively to him. For Evelyn Morris's death, both Palmer and Harmon were charged as co-conspirators. Harmon, already serving life without parole, faced additional charges for conspiracy and lying under oath during his original trial. His confession had been partial truth, crafted to hide Palmer's involvement while accepting personal responsibility. Perhaps his only act of conscience in an otherwise corrupt life. Michigan's prosecutor announced the new charges at a press conference that made national headlines. "This case represents one of the most significant serial murder investigations in Michigan history," she stated. "The collaborative efforts of multiple jurisdictions have brought to light not only Gregory Palmer's 17-year reign of terror, but also the disturbing partnership that led to Evelyn Morris's murder." For Sophia and Louise, the revelations brought pain, but also final clarity. The full truth of Evelyn's last hours was now known. The complete mechanism of the injustice they had suffered laid bare. "Does it change anything?" Louise asked softly as they sat together in her assisted living apartment, watching news coverage of Palmer's arraignment. Knowing it was both of them, Sophia considered the question carefully. "It changes the facts, but not the truth," she finally answered. "The truth is that Mom stood up to a powerful man who was used to getting his way. She refused to be silenced, and that courage cost her her life, but it also set in motion everything that followed, including bringing both of them to justice eventually." Louise nodded slowly, eyes fixed on Palmer's expressionless face on the television screen. "She would be proud of you. Not just for solving the case, but for how you did it, with integrity, with persistence." Palmer's trial in summer 2022 became a media sensation. A respected businessman revealed as a prolific serial killer, his crimes documented through his own photographs and journals. Psychiatric experts testified about his particular brand of psychopathy, his ability to compartmentalize his murders as artistic expressions, while maintaining a normal professional facade. Sophia testified about both the original investigation and the task force that ultimately identified Palmer. Her composed recounting of discovering her mother's killer had photographed his victims made headlines nationwide. The image of the detective confronting her mother's murderer became a powerful symbol of justice, delayed but ultimately served. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Palmer was sentenced to multiple life terms without possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, his expression remained unchanged, neither remorseful nor defeated, but slightly absent, as if already composing his next artistic statement. In the aftermath, Detroit's cold case unit received national recognition and increased funding. Sophia was offered promotions, special assignments, even book deals, but declined most, preferring to continue the work that had defined her life, bringing answers to families who had waited too long for truth. The Morris case became required study at police academies across the country, not just for its investigative aspects, but for its illustration of how determination and methodical work could overcome decades of obstruction and concealment. For Detroit itself, the resolution of these cold cases became another chapter in its ongoing Renaissance story, a city facing its painful past honestly while building toward a more just future. Community leaders spoke of the Morris standard of accountability, the principle that no power or position could ultimately shield wrongdoing from consequences. On the anniversary of Palmer's conviction, Sophia visited the site where the Packard plant had once stood. The massive complex had finally been demolished, the land cleared for new development. Affordable housing, community gardens, a health clinic. Where decay and abandonment had once symbolized Detroit's decline, new growth now represented its resilient spirit. Standing on ground that had once held such darkness, Sophia felt an unexpected sense of peace. The search that had defined her life had reached its conclusion. Both men responsible for her mother's death were imprisoned. The truth, in all its complexity, had finally emerged from decades of shadows. A light snow began to fall as she stood there, reminiscent of that January night in 1992, when Evelyn Morris had stepped from the blue light diner into a fate she could not have imagined. But unlike that night, this snow felt cleansing, renewing, covering old scars with the promise of new beginnings. Sophia turned away from the past and walked toward her car, toward the future she was now free to build. The Morris case had closed. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. And Detroit, the city that had witnessed it all, continued its slow but determined journey forward, its industrial ruins giving way to new possibilities, its cold cases yielding at last to the persistent light of truth. Summer 2022 saw a gradual shift in Sophia Morris's life. With both Harmon and Palmer now permanently incarcerated, the weight that had defined her existence for 3 decades began to transform. It didn't vanish, such burdens never truly disappear, but it evolved into something she could carry differently, something that propelled rather than hindered. The dual convictions had triggered widespread media interest in her story. Major networks produced documentaries with titles like The Detective's Daughter and Justice at Last, The Morris Case. Book publishers approached with lucrative offers. Hollywood studios pitched film rights. Sophia declined most, protecting her privacy, while agreeing to limited interviews focused on cold case methodology rather than personal drama. "I didn't solve this case for fame," she explained to Lieutenant Reynolds when he questioned her reluctance to embrace the spotlight. "I did it because every victim deserves answers, even if they come decades later." Reynolds nodded, understanding. He'd witnessed firsthand how Sophia channeled her personal loss into professional purpose, never using her story for advancement or attention. Her restraint earned deep respect within the department, especially among younger officers who might have been tempted by the spotlight. In August, Louise Morris's health took a significant turn. At 79, her resilient spirit remained undimmed, but her body was failing. Doctors spoke gently of making her comfortable rather than treatment options. Sophia arranged a leave of absence from the department to spend these precious final days with the woman who had raised her. In Louise's assisted living apartment, grandmother and granddaughter sat together on a small balcony overlooking a flowering courtyard. The evening air was warm, filled with the scent of late summer blooms. Louise, thinner now, wrapped in a light blanket despite the warmth, reached for Sophia's hand. "I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice softer but still clear. "When this is over, when I'm gone, you'll be alone." "Grandma, don't talk like that," Sophia began, but Louise squeezed her hand firmly. "Listen to me. You've spent your life looking backward, carrying our family's pain. First finding justice for your mother, then catching Palmer. You've achieved more than I ever thought possible." She paused, gathering strength. "But Evelyn wouldn't want justice to be the only thing in your life. She'd want you to live fully, to find joy." Sophia sat quietly, absorbing her grandmother's words. Since childhood, her path had been clear. Become a detective, solve her mother's case, bring the killer to justice. With that mission accomplished, the future stretched before her, suddenly uncharted. "What would that even look like?" she asked softly. "Moving forward without that purpose?" Louise smiled, wisdom etched in the lines of her face. "That's for you to discover. But I see possibilities you've been too focused to notice. Your nursing studies, your mentorship of young detectives, the way you speak about cold cases as stories waiting to be told. You have gifts beyond solving crimes, Sophia. It's time to explore them. 3 weeks later, Louise Morris passed peacefully in her sleep, Sophia holding her hand as the first light of dawn filtered through the window. The funeral was small but deeply felt, attended by police colleagues, neighbors who remembered the family from decades past, and women who had found their voices through the Palmer case. As Sophia stood beside the grave, watching Louise's casket being lowered next to Evelyn's, she felt a strange sense of completion. 3 generations of Morris women were now reunited. Grandmother, mother, daughter, their stories intertwined across time, linked by love and loss and ultimately justice. Detective Morris? She turned to find a young woman approaching hesitantly, perhaps 25, with warm brown skin and solemn eyes. She looked vaguely familiar, but Sophia couldn't immediately place her. "I'm Alicia Washington," the woman said. "My aunt was Denise Washington, Palmer's 3rd victim. I was born after she died, but my family has lived with her absence my whole life." She paused, emotion tightening her voice. "I just wanted to thank you, not just for catching him, but for showing us all that justice is possible, even after so many years." Sophia nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. Your aunt deserved justice. All of them did. "Boo, that's actually why I wanted to talk to you," Alicia continued. "I'm studying criminal justice at Wayne State. Your work inspired me. I want to help other families like mine, like yours." The conversation shifted something in Sophia's perspective. Looking at this young woman, she recognized herself 20 years earlier, driven by personal loss, seeking purpose through justice. But where Sophia had carried her burden alone for so long, perhaps she could help lighten the path for others. Returning to work after bereavement leave, Sophia scheduled a meeting with Captain Harrison, who had replaced Reynolds upon his promotion to precinct commander. Harrison was younger than previous leadership, part of a new generation rising within the department. "I'd like to propose a new initiative," Sophia began, sliding a folder across his desk. "A formal mentorship program for detectives working cold cases, particularly those with personal connections to violent crime." Harrison reviewed the proposal with interest. It outlined a structured support system, combining professional development with psychological resources, designed to help officers channel personal motivation effectively while maintaining emotional well-being. "This is excellent," he said finally. "But why now?" Sophia considered the question. "Because I wish I'd had something like this, and because I've realized there are more Alicia Washingtons out there, people drawn to this work because of personal loss who need guidance to do it right." The Cold Case Victim Advocacy and Mentorship Program launched in January 2023. The timing coincided with the 30th anniversary of Evelyn's murder, a date Sophia had once dreaded but now approached with a different perspective. Rather than marking another year without answers, it became the starting point for something new. Initial funding allowed for limited implementation, a pilot program within Detroit's cold case unit, with plans to expand if successful. Sophia developed training materials drawing on her own experience, collaborating with police psychologists to address the unique challenges faced by officers with personal connections to violent crime. Her dual path continued, detective work by day, nursing studies by night. Both fed different aspects of her personality, the investigator and the caregiver, complementary rather than contradictory. As she advanced through her nursing program, instructors noted her unusual perspective on patient care, informed by years of working with victims and families in crisis. Spring brought an unexpected development. A production company creating a documentary series on cold cases approached Sophia with a different kind of proposal. Rather than focusing on her personal story, they wanted her expertise as a consultant and occasional on-screen expert discussing investigative methodology. "We're trying to shift the narrative," the producer explained. "Ties dit, Batista de season. Less sensationalism, more education about how these cases actually get solved. The public needs to understand that real detective work isn't about dramatic breakthroughs or lone geniuses. It's methodical, collaborative, and often takes decades." The premise resonated with Sophia's own values. After careful consideration and department approval, she agreed to participate, with the condition that any fees be donated to the victims' advocacy program she had established. Filming began in summer 2023, focusing on cold cases from across the country. Sophia provided insights on evidence preservation, witness interviewing techniques, and the impact of technological advances on historical investigations. Her segments were straightforward and educational, avoiding the dramatic recreations and speculative theories that characterized many true crime programs. The series, titled Cold Case Files: The Long Road to Justice, premiered that fall to critical acclaim. Reviewers praised its respectful approach to victims and families, its focus on investigative process rather than lurid details, and its educational value for the public. For Sophia, the most meaningful feedback came from families featured in the series, many of whom expressed gratitude for how their loved ones' stories were handled. One mother wrote, "For 20 years, my daughter has been reduced to a victim in a sensational murder. Your program finally showed her as a person and showed the real work it takes to find answers." And as the documentary series gained traction, Sophia found herself increasingly called upon as a speaker at law enforcement conferences and academic institutions. She developed a presentation titled "The Human Element in Cold Cases," addressing both the technical aspects of long-term investigations and the psychological impacts on victims' families and investigating officers. During a conference in Chicago, she met Dr. Marcus Chen, director of a forensic science program at Northwestern University. His approach to evidence analysis combined cutting-edge technology with old-fashioned detective work, a philosophy that aligned with Sophia's own methodology. "The problem with cold cases isn't just technological limitations," he told her over coffee after their respective presentations. "It's institutional memory and perspective. Evidence gets forgotten, witnesses die, contexts change. We need to train investigators to think beyond their immediate time frame." Their professional collaboration evolved into regular consultations on difficult cases, joint articles for law enforcement journals, and eventually a friendship that surprised Sophia with its ease and depth. At 41, she had spent so long focused on her mission that personal relationships had always seemed secondary, temporary. Now, with her primary goal achieved, she found herself open to connections that once seemed impossible. In Detroit, the cold case victim advocacy and mentorship program expanded beyond its initial scope. What began as support for officers with personal connections to crime evolved into a broader resource for families navigating the long, often frustrating process of cold case investigation. Alicia Washington, now in her final year of criminal justice studies, became the program's first official intern. Under Sophia's guidance, she developed resources for families of cold case victims, including guidebooks explaining investigation processes, support group connections, and practical advice for keeping cases active in public awareness. "You're doing something I wish had existed when I was growing up," Sophia told her during a mentoring session, "creating a bridge between law enforcement and victims' families, helping them understand each other." By December 2023, the program had assisted over 30 families across Michigan and established partnerships with similar initiatives in neighboring states. Its success caught the attention of the state attorney general, who proposed expanding it statewide as a model for victim advocacy. During this period of professional growth, Sophia continued her nursing studies, completing clinical rotations in various healthcare settings. Her unusual background made her a standout student. Her experience with trauma victims provided insights that textbooks couldn't teach, while her investigative skills translated into exceptional observational abilities. "You notice things other students miss," her clinical supervisor commented during an evaluation. "Not just physical symptoms, but contextual details. Family dynamics, environmental factors, subtle inconsistencies in patient histories." Sophia graduated with her nursing degree in spring 2024, achieving a goal that had once belonged to her mother. The ceremony was bittersweet without Louise present to witness it, but as Sophia crossed the stage to receive her diploma, she felt a sense of completion, of promises kept across generations. Rather than choosing between her two professions, Sophia found a path that integrated both. She reduced her detective work to part-time, focusing specifically on the victim advocacy program, while accepting a position as a forensic nurse examiner with Detroit Receiving Hospital. The role allowed her to apply both skill sets to a critical need, providing medical care for victims of violence while preserving evidence crucial for potential prosecutions. This dual professional identity, detective and nurse, investigator and healer, represented not a division, but a synthesis of Sophia's experiences. The path that began with her mother's murder had led through decades of determined investigation to a place where justice and care intersected, where solving crimes and healing wounds became complementary missions. In July 2024, Sophia received an unexpected letter forwarded through the Michigan Department of Corrections. The sender was Victor Harmon, now in his late 70s and serving his life sentence at Chippewa Correctional Facility. Her first instinct was to discard it unopened, but professional curiosity and personal history compelled her to read his words. The letter was brief, written in shaky handwriting. Harmon explained that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, given months to live. He requested a meeting, not for forgiveness or absolution, he claimed, but to provide information about other potential victims connected to Palmer that he had never disclosed. Sophia consulted with prosecutors and victims' advocates before agreeing to the meeting. Despite personal misgivings, the possibility of bringing closure to additional families outweighed her reluctance to face her mother's killer again. The prison visiting room was stark and institutional, security cameras monitoring from above, guards stationed at intervals along the walls. Harmon sat waiting at a metal table, handcuffed despite his obviously diminished physical condition. Age and illness had hollowed his once imposing frame, leaving a frail old man in a prison jumpsuit. "Detective Morris," he said as she sat across from him, his voice raspier than she remembered. "Thank you for coming." "This isn't a social visit, Harmon," she replied evenly. "You claim to have information about other victims. That's the only reason I'm here." He nodded slowly, direct and professional, just like before. "I respect that." He paused, seemingly gathering thoughts. "I've spent years thinking about what I did. To your mother, to you and your grandmother, to everyone affected. I know words mean nothing at this point, but I am sorry." Sophia remained silent, her expression neutral. She hadn't come for apologies. Sensing this, Harmon shifted focus. Palmer had connections beyond Michigan, photographers, artists with similar interests. They communicated through private exhibitions, code words in arts publications. I attended 2 such gatherings, one in Minneapolis, one in Cleveland. I met people, heard things. Over the next hour, he provided names, dates, locations, information about a network of individuals potentially linked to similar crimes across the Midwest. Some details were vague, clouded by time and his peripheral involvement, but others were specific enough to merit investigation. As the meeting concluded, Harmon looked directly at Sophia, his eyes clear despite his failing health. "I know this doesn't change anything between us. It can't, but perhaps it helps others who've waited too long for answers." Sophia stood to leave, but paused. "Why now, after all these years?" Harmon's gaze dropped to his handcuffed wrists. "Because facing death clarifies priorities. Because secrets serve no purpose anymore. And because I've watched your career from in here, what you've built from what Palmer and I destroyed. It seemed important somehow to contribute something useful before the end." She left without responding, carrying his information directly to the interstate task force that had been established following Palmer's conviction. Initial verification confirmed several promising leads. Missing women whose cases matched patterns identified in the Palmer investigation, potential suspects whose movements aligned with Harmon's timeline. Victor Harmon died in prison 3 months later, never knowing the results of the investigations his information sparked. Sophia received official notification but did not attend the prison burial. For her, Harmon remained a complicated figure, undeniably a murderer, yet ultimately a cooperating witness whose final act had potentially helped other victims' families. By early 2025, Sophia's dual career path had found stable equilibrium. 3 days weekly as a forensic nurse examiner, 2 days with the cold case unit focused on victim advocacy. The arrangement allowed her to apply both skill sets to their fullest potential, while maintaining personal boundaries that had often blurred during her years of single-minded investigation. The victim advocacy program had expanded significantly, now operating as an independent non-profit with secure funding through state grants and private donations. Alicia Washington, having graduated with honors, joined as assistant director, bringing fresh energy and perspective to the organization's growth. Their flagship initiative, Cold Case Family Support, provided comprehensive resources for those navigating the often frustrating process of long-term investigations. Regular workshops connected families with investigators, explaining procedures and limitations while establishing realistic expectations. Support groups offered emotional sustenance during the often years-long wait for answers. In February, Sophia received an unexpected invitation. Northwestern University was establishing a new interdisciplinary program combining forensic science, criminal justice, and victim advocacy. Dr. Chen, now heading the initiative, asked her to join as a visiting lecturer, teaching a course titled Human Dimensions of Cold Cases. The opportunity represented a new direction, a chance to shape future investigators' understanding of both the technical and human aspects of long-term cases. After careful consideration and arrangement of a temporary leave from her Detroit positions, Sophia accepted. Chicago in spring 2025 offered a different rhythm than Detroit, a new city with its own history and energy, free from the weight of personal memories that permeated her hometown. The academic environment provided intellectual stimulation and fresh perspectives, while her course allowed her to distill decades of experience into practical wisdom for the next generation. Her students came from diverse backgrounds: criminal justice majors, forensic science specialists, psychology students interested in trauma and recovery. Many were drawn by her reputation, having seen the documentary series or read about her work. A few, like Alicia, had personal connections to unsolved crimes that fueled their professional interests. Detective Morris, a student asked during an early lecture, "How do you maintain objectivity when you're personally connected to a case?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "You don't," she finally answered. "Not completely. The key isn't pretending personal investment doesn't exist. It's acknowledging it, understanding how it influences your perspective, and building safeguards against bias. Personal motivation can provide determination that carries you through decades of investigation, but it needs to be balanced with methodical process and external checks." This honesty about the complexities of her experience resonated with students. Rather than presenting herself as an untouchable expert, Sophia shared both successes and struggles, creating space for nuanced discussions about the realities of long-term investigations. Her collaboration with Dr. Chen deepened during this period. Their complementary expertise, her practical investigative experience, his scientific innovation, resulting in new approaches to cold case methodology. Together, they developed protocols for reassessing decades-old evidence with contemporary technology while maintaining chain of custody and legal viability. Their professional partnership gradually evolved into something more personal: shared meals after faculty meetings, weekend explorations of Chicago's architecture and museums, long conversations about topics far removed from criminal investigation. At 43, Sophia found herself experiencing a kind of relationship she had never prioritized before, one based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine connection. "I never expected this," she admitted one evening as they walked along Lake Michigan's shoreline, the city's skyline illuminated against the night sky. "For so long, there was only room for one thing in my life." Chen nodded, understanding. "Sometimes we need to complete one journey before another can begin. Your mother's case wasn't just an investigation. It was the foundation of your identity. Resolving it opened space for everything else." By summer's end, as her visiting position concluded, Sophia faced a decision about returning to Detroit. The victim advocacy program was thriving under Alicia's day-to-day leadership. The cold case unit had incorporated many of her methodologies into standard practice. Her absence had confirmed that her initiatives could continue without her constant presence. Meanwhile, Northwestern offered a permanent position, splitting time between teaching and establishing a cold case review center that would provide pro bono consultation to departments across the Midwest. The role would allow her to amplify her impact, applying her experience to hundreds of cases while training future investigators. Detroit held her history, the neighborhood where she'd grown up, her mother's and grandmother's graves, the community that had shaped her. Chicago offered new possibilities: professional growth, expanded influence, and a relationship with unexpected depth and potential. As she considered her options, Sophia visited the lakefront park where she and Chen often walked. The September air carried hints of approaching autumn, leaves beginning their gradual transformation from green to gold. Lake Michigan stretched before her, vast and changeable, while behind her the city pulsed with energy and possibility. Her phone buzzed with a message from Alicia. "Just closed the Jensen case from 1997. Family finally has answers after 28 years. Thought you should know. Your methods made this possible." Sophia smiled, a sense of completion washing over her. The work continued, with or without her direct involvement. The seeds she had planted, methodologies, advocacy systems, mentorship, were bearing fruit beyond her individual efforts. The realization brought clarity. Her life's defining quest had been fulfilled with Palmer's conviction. The subsequent years had been about building something from that resolution: systems, practices, and relationships that extended beyond personal vindication to broader justice. Now standing between lake and city, between past and future, Sophia Morris made her choice, not between Detroit and Chicago, between investigation and education, between past and future, but to embrace the fullness of a life no longer defined solely by a decades-old tragedy. The path forward would include elements of all she had been and all she might become: detective and nurse, advocate and educator, daughter honoring a mother's memory, and woman creating her own future. The journey that began in tragedy had led through justice to a place where new possibilities awaited, where Evelyn's legacy lived on, not just in resolution, but in ongoing transformation. As Sophia turned back toward the city, her decision made. Detroit's cold case that had shaped a lifetime finally reached its true conclusion, not with a conviction or a sentence, but with the freedom to move forward, carrying the past not as a burden, but as foundation for whatever came next. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.